Welcome to Minority Caucus. My name is Akbar Ruhullah Khomeini. This week, President Mahama bowed to pressure from the NDC leadership and invoked his pardon powers under Article 72 to free the montie convicts. The three were convicted on their own plea for scandalizing and lowering the authority of the Supreme Court of Ghana. Several prominent Ghanaians hailed the Supreme Court decision and counseled the president to resist the invitation to pardon the convicts. However, the president rejected the wise counsel from majority of Ghanaians, including his lawyer, Tony Lita, and elected to please his party by freeing the three. The decision has attracted widespread condemnations, with some contending that the president by his action has sanctioned insults and threats in public discourse. In the northern region, the president has affirmed this view by repeatedly casting aspersions at the NPP presidential candidate. He has referred to him as divisive dictator. These insults from the president has prompted political scientist Dr. Bosman to label the president as a desperate man. We'll go for a quick break, and when we return, I would introduce my guests. Welcome back. Tonight I've been joined by a member of the New Patriotic Party National Communications team and also a private legal practitioner, Mr. Samuel Abu Jinapo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, my very good friend.
This week, we all got the news through the communications minister that the president has exercised his powers under Article 72 of the 1992 Constitution to free those who were convicted by the Supreme Court for scandalizing the authority of the court. Prior to this decision, many had advised the president, including the montie, that it was not right for the president to free them. What is your general view about this matter before we go down to the specifics?
Thank you very much, Akbar, and let me say a cherished good evening to your cherished viewers. My first impressions are that this is the decision by the president, or the move by the president, constitutes a major assault to the Ghanaian democracy. The democracy we've been practicing since 1992 to date. It's a major, major blow to our democracy. It is a major blow to our democracy because one of the major pillars of every democracy anywhere in the world, whether it's the British democracy or it's the American democracy or the Indian democracy or what have you, the judiciary. A democracy without a judiciary is not worth a salt, because at the bedrock of a democracy is the doctrine of the rule of law. And the enforcement and upliftment of the rule of law is the preserve of the judiciary. And therefore, for a president, and there are many angles to it, for a president to exercise powers pursuant to Article 72 in the manner that he has done, I just think that it's a major assault on Ghanaian democracy, because what the president has done is actually to interfere with the smooth administration of justice, to interfere with the independence of the judiciary, and to act in a manner which, in my respectful view, constitutes an exercise of judicial power, which is not the intent of the framers of 1992 Constitution, particularly Article 72. We'll get the opportunity to delve into that. So my initial impressions as to what I make of the decision by President Mahama is that this is a major assault. I mean, there's no two ways about that.
But
it's a dark day. It's the darkest day of Ghanaian democratic experiment.
Well, but many of his supporters have rejected this claim on grounds that it was a Council of State which advised the president to take the decision that he took. And so we cannot entirely blame the president for acting on the advice of the Council of State, which is also a constitutional organ.
Well, first of all, Akbar, let me just deal with the issue. First of all, the first issue is that almost everything which preceded President Mahama's decision in relation to these montie 3 persons, any objective, keen observer of everything that had happened prior to the decision that he took cannot help it but come to the firm conclusion that all of it was contrived. The petition which was sent to President Mahama, the ministers who lined up, ministers who could sit around the cabinet table to deliberate on matters such as this one with the president, and yet went on the streets to sign petitions ostensibly to put pressure on President Mahama. The Council of State, which was said to have deliberated on this matter, and for the first time in Ghanaian political history, when the Council of State is presenting a decision to the president, it does so through the Chief of Staff in the full glare of the media, and the pictures of the presentation of the decision is published by the presidency. It's never happened in Ghanaian history, in Ghanaian political history. When you put all of that together, it is pretty obvious that everything was contrived by the president. The president knew about it, the president sanctioned it, the president blessed it, and all of those things were meant to create a conducive stage for the president to arrive at a decision that, in my view, he had taken way before. So that's one leg. The second one is that the Supreme Court has decided that the president of Ghana is not bound. The president of Ghana is not bound by the advice of the Council of State. So if the Council of State were to advise him one way or the other, the president can disregard that advice. And indeed, in this particular instance, we don't even know for a fact officially that the Council of State advised the president to give a pardon to these montie 3 persons. But whatever it is, let's even assume that the Council of State advised him to do so. The point I'm making is the president is not bound by the advice of the Council of State. It's a decision which has been held by the Supreme Court of Ghana. But even more fundamentally, Akbar, more fundamentally is the fact that if you look at Article 72, there's been there's a raging legal debate, legal discussion as to whether or not the president has powers to pardon persons who are convicted and sentenced for contempt of court. I mean, that's a different argument I don't intend to get into. Let's assume, let's take an expensive assumption that the president has powers pursuant to Article 72 to pardon persons who are convicted and sentenced for contempt of court. Now, if you look at the Constitution, Article 296 puts fetters on every power vested in a public officer, which power is discretionary in nature. So any public officer who has the power to exercise a discretion by law is required to exercise the discretion in accordance or consistent with the dictates or tenets of Article 296. And indeed, Article 296 is very clear. Article 296 says that a public officer who is called upon to exercise a discretionary power ought to exercise the discretionary power in a manner that is fair, in a manner that is candid, in a manner that is not actuated with prejudice, and in a manner that is not in accordance with his whims and caprices. In very simple terms, what it means is that if I have to exercise a discretionary power as a public officer, in relation to you, Akbar, I have to exercise the discretionary power in a manner that is fair and candid, which is not prejudicial. So it ought not be that I'm exercising the discretionary power in your favor because you happen to be my brother, or you happen to be my cousin, or you happen to be a member of my political party. It must be in a manner which is reasonable, and which the reasonable man will say that given the circumstances of the case, or given the circumstances of the matter for which the public officer is called upon to exercise a discretionary power, the person exercises the discretionary power fairly, candidly, and without prejudice, and in a manner which is not in accord with his whims and caprices. So the point is that President Mahama, in exercising his discretionary power pursuant to Article 72 in this matter, all the factors, the totality of the circumstance of this matter leads us to only one and only reasonable conclusion, reasonable and irresistible conclusion, that the president did so because these persons are NDC persons.
So it's tainted with bias.
Bias and prejudice. And that he did so simply because they are NDC members who work for him, because one of them is a card-bearing member of the NDC. One of them came out publicly to say that he relocated into Ghana primarily and fundamentally to work for President Mahama. So that is the first consideration for which reason President Mahama granted pardon to these persons. The second consideration is also because NDC activists, foot soldiers, and leading members piled up pressure on President Mahama to act in a certain direction. So the president was not consistent. The president did not act in a manner which is consistent with the dictates of Article 296 and which places an obligation on a public officer in the exercise of his or her discretionary power. So that is the first flaw, that the president acted in this matter simply because these persons are NDC persons and because NDC activists and leading members put pressure on him and called upon him to act. And therefore, he acted not in the public interest or not for the public good or not to promote the public good, but he acted to promote a political partisan interest, which is an NDC interest. So that is the real difficulty. And I look forward to somebody challenging the decision that the president has taken pursuant to Article 296, because the decision is taken clearly, is tainted with bias and prejudice. So that's the first point. The second point, I'm sure you've heard a lot of discussion about the punishment is harsh and what. Let me just touch on that quickly. First of all, the powers vested in the president pursuant to Article 296 are not to determine the harshness or otherwise of a court punishment. Neither are those powers to determine the propriety or otherwise of a court punishment. The president of Ghana is not a judge. So the president cannot review the punishment of a court. When the High Court, for instance, gives you a sentence, you may appeal not against the conviction, but you can appeal against the punishment or the sentencing. And the Court of Appeal can reverse it, can amend it, can modify it. It is the courts of Ghana who have the jurisdiction and the mandate to determine the propriety or otherwise of court punishment, not the president. And that is not the intent of Article 72. And the president and his subordinates and appointees who creates the impression and makes the point that the punishment was too harsh and therefore the president had to come in to pardon the persons and show mercy. It is completely flawed because Article 72 doesn't vest in the president powers to review the punishments of courts. Now on punishment. And I've heard the NDC people make the point that the court acted unfairly, the court was unreasonable, the Supreme Court, in this case, we are talking about the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court was the highest court of the land, that the Supreme Court was unfair, the court was unreasonable, and the punishment was too harsh. You see, what they fail to appreciate is that when it comes to punishment, the meting out of punishment by a court, in some cases, and indeed in almost all cases, is discretionary. In some cases, the lawmaker specifies it, and even the lawmaker do give the court a range that not less than 5 years and not more than 10 years. So the court always has to exercise a discretion whether or not to give you 6 years or 7 years or what have you. In this particular case, contempt is a misdemeanor, and misdemeanors can attract as much as 3 years in terms of jail. And therefore, the court will have to decide whether to give you 1 day or to give you 3 years. Now, I say that when it comes to a court exercising its discretion as to what punishment to mete out, a judge cannot come to court, and because that morning the wife did not give him a good smile, the judge comes to court and gives harsh punishment. No, the law doesn't allow that. A judge can also come to court, and because that morning the wife smiled at him, gave him a broad smile, and gave him a cozy hug, therefore the judge comes to court and gives lenient punishment. No. The Supreme Court of Ghana has decided a case where the court set out the parameters, the principles, the considerations, the factors which will motivate a court in meting out punishment. One of the key considerations any court ought to take into account per the decision of the Supreme Court, which is a recent case, in meting out punishment is that has the conduct become a menace to society or not? Has the conduct become rampant? So if armed robbery has become rampant and the lawmaker says in armed robbery you should give 5 years, not less than 5 years, not more than 10. If it's become rampant, the court may give the maximum, which is 10 years, to serve as a deterrent. And in this particular case, did the Supreme Court adhere to this principle of law which has been laid down by the court itself, I say that the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, the court that validated President Mahama's election and affirmed him as the validly elected president of Ghana, did not fail the good people of Ghana. And in that regard, Akbar, let me refer you to the judgment in this Montie matter at page 11, paragraph 2, where the court said, the court, again, the NDC people the people they are remorseful, they've apologized, as if after the people were convicted, it was subsequent to the conviction and the sentencing that the contemnors have become apologetic and remorseful, and therefore the Supreme Court did not take into account their apology and remorsefulness, and the president had to intervene in that regard. The Supreme Court, in its judgment, when we look at the judgment, the Supreme Court took into account all the apologies, all the remorsefulness, the pleas from the lawyers and everything, actually took into account the commitment made by the directors of the company that they were going to put in place measures to ensure that this conduct does not get repeated. The Supreme Court took all of that into account. And having taken all of that into account, the court said, and I quote, they say, however, this was before they are taking all the pleas into account, the court said, however, we realize that reckless attacks on judges of this court, in particular, and the judiciary in general, have become rampant in recent times and appear to be escalating in outrageousness and temerity. We need to make it universally unattractive deterrence. We need to make it universally unattractive for any person to indulge in such conduct. Despite the fact that 4 persons were punished for contempt of this court during the presidential election petition hearing in 2013, we have noticed a resurgence of contemnatious statements about the court that have the tendency to bring the administration of justice into disrepute, end quote. So let nobody create the impression that these are Supreme Courts, they are a bunch of unserious people who never took anything into account, they never took anything into consideration, and they dragged these people before them and just threw sentence at them. No, the court took into account the principles which will motivate a court's discretion in punishment. And as I've indicated, the court did so clearly. Now, you see, it is also important for us to contextualize the conduct for which reason these persons were dragged before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, many people have ignored the conduct for which reason they were brought to court.
But it's important we remind the Ghanaian people. I mean, our country has a history, first of all, and the political party we are dealing with has a history.
Yeah.
I mean, you recall that the murder of the 3 High Court judges and all in fact, their national chairman making the point that there are so many ways of killing the cat in relation to his attack on the judiciary.
And the attacks on the Chief Justice.
Chief Justice consistently for the past 8 years.
2009.
Absolutely. So what is the conduct that these people put up? These are persons who made statements to the effect that they actually have evinced an intention to kill judges.
Yeah. And to rape.
And to rape. I mean, that's the conduct we are talking about.
These 2 are grievous offenses under a criminal code.
Absolutely, which the Attorney General herself ought to have preferred charges against them, dragged them to court, and prosecuted them in a very spirited manner. And the Supreme Court had occasion to mention that. Yeah. You know, and again, these are persons who just didn't say they will rape a judge. They said they will rape the Chief Justice of Ghana.
And marry her.
And marry her. That's the whole point. And the Chief Justice of Ghana is the 3rd most important person in our constitutional architecture. They said they will rape her. So that's the conduct we are talking about. So you see, the issues are extremely worrying. The matters which have come up are very worrying. And I really will draw your attention to one other matter, which is the embarrassment that this decision by President Mahama has occasioned the Republic of Ghana.
Across the world.
Across the world. Akbar, you will take notice that Reuters International, a very reputable media outfit, actually, and I'll pull it out for you, actually reported on this matter. Yeah. And the manner in which it was reported, when we go on break, I'll pull it out.
And when we come, the president ordered
he orders that they should free persons who threaten judges.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the state in which we are. Now, the point that has to be made is that in these elections, there are clear choices for the Ghanaian people to make. in these elections, there are dramatic differences between the two leading presidential candidates, i.e. President John Dramani Mahama and Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. And in these elections, Agba, on December 7th, the Ghanaian people will be casting their ballots. They'll be casting their ballot, investing enormous executive power in one man. They will vest powers which are far-reaching and which has far-reaching implications. They will vest powers which powers can be misapplied and which powers can be abused and which powers can be exercised recklessly and which will have far-reaching implications for the rule of law, for our democracy, for the independence of our judiciary, for the smooth administration of justice, as has happened in this montie 3 matter. So when the Ghanaian people go to the polls, I respectfully and humbly call upon them to be mindful of who they are vesting executive power into. And in our party, at the MPP, I can say with pride that our presidential candidate, when he was called to the occasion and he was put to test, he never failed the Ghanaian people.
Absolutely.
As you know, sometime in August 2013, the Supreme Court, in a very momentous decision, held that President Mahama had been validly elected as president of Ghana.
5-4.
5-4 decision in 2-3 minutes. My Lord Justice Atuguba put it this way: the net effect of all that he had said was that the petition has been dismissed. And on that fateful day, you will hear the NDC people say, did Akufo-Addo have a choice? Look, the Kenyan politicians who incited their people, and as a result of that, thousands of Kenyan citizens were slaughtered in daylight. They didn't have a choice. They ought not to have had a choice because the Constitution of Kenya has stipulated how to redress electoral disputes.
And they had a military, a police, everything, just like us.
Absolutely. The politicians in La Côte d'Ivoire, who were aggrieved by election results, the La Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivorian constitution gave them channels to proceed in seeking redress, and yet 3,000 people, 3,000 innocent Ivorian citizens were slaughtered.
Case, their constitutional court, just like the equivalent of our Supreme Court, pronounced upon the matter.
Absolutely.
But
yet thousands of people were slaughtered, and hundreds and thousands of people were displaced on that fateful day. And I want the Ghanaian people, I respectfully want the Ghanaian people to see the dramatic difference between Nana Akufo-Addo and President Mahama. Whereas in President Mahama, the highest court of the land takes decisions and he finds ways. He actually finds unconstitutional and lawful ways to whittle down or render the effect of the court's decisions nugatory and actually diminish the effect of the highest court of the land's decision. After the Supreme Court of the land, the highest court of the land, 5 judges have sat down, deliberated, and found it expedient.
And they were unanimous.
Unanimous, and found it expedient that these persons should suffer this punishment. President Mahama sits in the comfort of his office and erroneously relies on a certain constitutional provision, and in a very prejudicial, biased manner, takes a decision to whittle down the effect of the Supreme Court decision. That is President Mahama. That's the choice the Ghanaian people have. The other choice the Ghanaian people have is that on that fateful day, after all that had happened, this is what Nana Akufo-Addo said, and I quote him, quote, he said, whilst I disagree with the court's decision, and I repeat, whilst I disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept that what the court says brings finality to the election dispute. We shall not be asking for a review of the verdict so we can all move in the interest of our nation. That is the consummate, unflinching, unbridled, unrepentant adherent to the rule of law and democratic accountability. And that is Nana Akufo-Addo.
And this leadership position exhibited by Nana Addo disappointed the likes of Ayekwe Otu, who at that time was chairman of the
they said that he should go for a review. But that is the consummate adherent to the rule of law and democrat that the Ghanaian people have in Nana Akufo-Addo. Now you see, there is another matter that I need to lay on the table, which is that you broached on it. When this matter came up, Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers, an illustrious son of the land. In fact, Dr. Ibn Chambers had been a member of parliament for 12 years, 3 consecutive terms.
Deputy minister.
He had been a deputy, one of the most celebrated, admired deputy ministers of state under President J.J. Rawlings. Dr. Chambers was the chairperson of ECOWAS. Dr. Chambers today is the special representative of the United Nations Secretary General to the whole of Africa. Indeed, Dr. Chambers admonished, and he was a one-time member of the National Democratic Congress. Dr. Chambers, the statesman that he is, admonished President Mahama not to take the kind of decision that he's taking because it will have far-reaching implications for the judiciary, the democracy, and the rule of law in Ghana. Dr. Chambers.
So vital is the judiciary that even under military dictatorships, the sanctity of that institution has been maintained.
Absolutely.
I mean, even in the absence of democracy, you can still have the judiciary.
And then Professor Kakari. In fact, Professor Kakari is the founder and president of Media Foundation. The foundation that brings up reports that the NDC gleefully and happily lash onto all the time. Professor Kakari actually went as far as saying that no serious president will contemplate or consider this petition, let alone grant a pardon. That's Professor Kakari.
And many Christian leaders.
In fact, the national president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference in Ghana, Bishop Bonsu Oso, that bishop came out to state that it will be extremely fatal and it will be disastrous for the democracy and judiciary of our country if the president were to go ahead and grant pardon to these persons. Now, you see, Akbar, the problem we have in Ghana today is that, with the greatest of respect to the judiciary, I have a lot of respect for the judiciary of Ghana, and I have an enormous respect for the Supreme Court of our country. It's not every decision that they take that I may be happy with or I may agree with, but the Democrats that we all aspire to be, we ought to respect the decisions of the Supreme Court and give effect to the decisions of the Supreme Court. That Supreme Court, in my view, by this singular conduct by President Mahama, the aura, the aura, the charm, the reverence, the authority of the Supreme Court has been shattered.
Absolutely.
Just by this decision. The whole psyche of the society, that when the courts make a pronouncement, it will not matter what a president or the executive thinks.
And the precedence is even more dangerous. What it means is that every president would be obligated to come to the defense of a party person who has committed a crime, allegedly in the course of the duty of the party. And that if a president was to stay away from intervening in such matter, people will refer to President Mahama and what he did for these 3. And that's more dangerous for our democracy.
It's an extremely bad precedent. And I even think that for President Mahama's own legacy, I mean, it's a very terrible legacy. Of course, when it comes to legacy, the president's legacy is poor and weak in all aspects. But this was another opportunity for him to have showed leadership and leave a modicum of legacy, which he can be proud of. Because you know President Nkrumah, I'm not going to get into adverse history, but you know President Nkrumah, Riakoto, I mean, it's a classic example, it's a legacy. Even Prime Minister Buzia, when he said no court, no court, even though it is still arguable and contentious out there. But even that, people make reference to it. So the decision that President Mahama has taken, that decision will go down into the annals of Ghanaian political and judicial history as being a very terrible precedent, has been a very bad example that not a minister, not a deputy minister, not a district executive, but no mean a person, but the president of the republic who swore to defend the constitution and the laws of this country. I think the decision he's taking is politically incorrect. It doesn't bode well for him politically. But even more importantly, it is not lawful for him to take such a decision. I've already explained to you that in the teeth of Article 296, the decision that the president has taken, completely unlawful. It flies in the face of Article 296. But there is hope. But there is hope. There is hope because in these elections, you have somebody whose entire life has been about the promotion of the rule of law, has been about the broadening of the frontiers of human rights, has been about his entire life has been about the entrenchment of the law and the respect to the law.
His entire life has been about the entrenchment of the law. We'll go for a quick break and we'll be right back. Come back. Abu, before we went for break, you were making a point.
Yes.
Can you quickly wrap up?
Yes, so I'll wrap up on that. So the point I was making is there's hope. There's hope because, unlike the president, we have a candidate in the NPP who has demonstrated beyond any doubt that he respects the rule of law his entire life, and I've demonstrated to you in relation to how he accepted the Supreme Court's verdict. Indeed, whilst the president is exercising executive powers in a very reckless way, Nana Akufo-Addo is making commitments and proposals which will diminish his executive powers, as you know. Yeah. Akufo-Addo says in the first 6 months of his presidency, he's going to make sure that there's an appointment of a special prosecutor who will be non-partisan, who has security of tenure. So once he's appointed, until retirement, like it is the case in relation to the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, like it's in the case in the presence of judges, and he says that he will make sure that there is an act of parliament that will back it, so it will be pursuant to law, it will not be at the discretion of anybody, and that will chip away some executive powers if Akufo-Addo was president of Ghana. And indeed, in that regard, he says that members of his own government are going to be subject to the investigations and prosecutorial mandate of this special prosecutor. Okay. Today, my friend, today in South Africa, the South African finance minister, there is actually rumors in South Africa, it's been published in the international media, that the special prosecutor of South Africa is threatening to arrest the finance minister of South Africa. Indeed, the special prosecutor investigated the president of South Africa, President Zuma, and surcharged him in relation to the rehabilitation or renovation of his private residence, and he paid. That is the way Akufo-Addo will exercise executive power. That is how Akufo-Addo will respect the law. That is how Akufo-Addo will amend the law to ensure that executive power is diminished in some respect, and thus corruption will be fought fiercely in this country. So this is the difference between President Mahama and President Akufo-Addo. And you know, the president says he pardoned these persons based on compassionate grounds. Compassionate grounds? What's the basis of the compassion? Were they sick? Was there some calamity which befell them? What happened? So you feel compassion for a man when the man is in a certain state. These are able-bodied young men who have misconducted themselves, and they did so in a very palpable way. In
fact, who had said that they were ready to serve any sentence?
Absolutely. And who actually, when NDC persons visited them, who actually said, why did they pay the 10,000 cedis? Yeah. They should have given the 10,000 cedis to their family. These are people that the president finds it prudent, expedient, and reasonable to pardon. So these are the issues. But you see, in every political environment, presidents have choices all the time to make. Everywhere in the world, a president is always presented with different options, and president make choices. In this particular instance, President Mahama had a choice between the national interest, the public interest, and the public good, and his political partisan interest. He had the option to satisfy his country as opposed to satisfying his party. He chose to satisfy his party. There are consequences. Agba, you know, sometime in 1974, President Nixon had been consumed by the Watergate scandal, and President Nixon resigned as president. And when he resigned, just like in Ghana, there was a raging debate in the United States as to whether or not President Gerald Ford, who was vice president to President Nixon when he was president, and who had taken over the reins of power as president following the resignation of President Nixon. The debate was whether or not President Ford should pardon President Nixon for his crimes. And indeed, President Ford, and the commentary will be found usefully in a book titled Eyewitness to Power. And the author is one David Gengen. This is a reputable chap who comes on CNN. He actually worked for President Nixon all through to President Clinton. And you will find that the author states on Sunday morning, September 8, 1974, exactly 30 days after Ford took office, the White House summoned reporters for a mysterious announcement by the president. And this is what the president said, quote, he said, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have come to a decision which I felt I should tell you and all of my fellow American citizens as soon as I was certain in my own mind and in my own conscience that it is the right thing to do. I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon powers conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted and by these present do grant a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States." And just in a brief way, and listen to what the commentator says. The commentator says, in that brief instant of the pardon, Ford had severed the gossamer thread of trust that ties the people to the presidency. Just by that pardon. Wow. Just by that pardon. In Petersburg the next day, he was booed for the first time. Some demonstrators shouted, quote, "Jail Ford, jail Ford." And a worker standing by the airport fence told reporters, quote, "Oh, it was all fixed," end quote.
Wow.
History will always be a useful guide. As I've indicated earlier, this whole montie matter was all fixed.
You know, somebody made a point that you're just making right now. He says that executive authority is vested in the president, exercisable by himself or through his subordinates. Okay, so he elected to appoint ministers. The ministers goes to sign a petition. So indirectly, the president is signing a petition to himself.
Exactly, because that's a very good point. Because as you know, pursuant to Article 52 of the 1992 Constitution, the entire executive powers of Ghana are vested in the President of the Republic of Ghana. So if you actually have a president who happens to be a lawyer, the president can be his president and be all of the ministers. Mm-hmm. I mean, he can be Minister of Finance, Minister of Agriculture, and he can be Attorney General and Minister of Justice, because it's only the Attorney General that the Constitution gives a qualification as being a lawyer. If he's a lawyer, he can be an Attorney General as well. So every executive power exercised by any minister is exercisable following the powers vested in the president. And every power exercised is a delegated power. And the point you made is a brilliant one. So if a minister goes to sign a petition, the minister certainly is acting for and on behalf of the President of the Republic, because he's been a minister is actually an executive position, which is a delegated function given to him by the president. But even more importantly, is the fact that, can you imagine that President Obama is contemplating on invading a country, or that President Obama wants to take some foreign policy decision, or wants to take some executive decision, and Secretary of State John Kerry goes out on Main Street in America, in Washington, to sign a petition, ostensibly to put pressure on President Obama? Isn't that inherently incongruous? Isn't that contradictory? How is that going to happen? The people who sit around the cabinet table with the president to deliberate on matters, to deliberate on how to govern, to deliberate on matters such as the decision that was before President Mahama. Yeah. This is a decision which the president was to take as a public officer, the #1 public officer of the land. And the people who are required, enjoined, expected, and who has a responsibility to get into council with the president and discuss those matters and take a decision one way or the other. So if the president, in this montie matter, whatever decision the president takes, he ought to have done so in consultation with his cabinet. This same cabinet then leaves the cabinet room, leaves the Flagstaff House. You know, these same ministers who have unlimited access to the president then goes out onto the street to sign a certain petition, ostensibly to put pressure on the president. And I say that they can only do so with the tacit support, blessing, and acquiescence of the president. No minister can go and sign a petition to put pressure on his president if the president has not blessed it. And they should,
you'll be fired.
Agba, they should grant the Ghanaian people with a modicum of intelligence that we can see through all of these shenanigans and all of these maneuverings. It was all contrived. It was stage managed. The day the people were convicted, the day they were sentenced, when the president quickly realized that NDC people wanted him to pardon these people, the president took that decision that very day. They sat there, strategized, okay, let's get ministers, let's get these people to petition me. Let's get an FM station to open a book. Let's get our ministers to line up to sign it. Let's get it to the Council of State. And let's get the Council of State to bring that decision. Let's get it presented to the Chief of Staff. And let's do it in the full glare of the public and the media. Let's take pictures. Let's get the Flagstaff House Communication Bureau itself to release the pictures. So the stage will be created. Media, yeah. When the president then gives actualization to the decision he had taken in the first place, they can then come back and say, oh, it was because the Council of State advised him. It was because pressure. It was because Nyawota Makruti went to sign the petition. It was because some professor something did what? We all know that everything was state managed. And it is most unfortunate. Governance is a serious business. And it ought to be taken as such.
Quickly, the president has been touring the northern region, where you and I come from. He's been touring the eastern corridor of the region. He's been flying in 2 helicopters because the roads
are very bad.
Very bad.
One of them actually broke down, I think, in Saga also.
Oh, yeah.
The helicopters.
And he has been insulting and casting aspersions at Nana Akufo-Addo. It has been suggested that the president decided to free these people because since they were jailed, he has actually been doing their job, insulting from western region all the way to the central region and to the northern region. He's called Akufo-Addo divisive. He said Akufo-Addo is a dictator.
He said Akufo-Addo was sleeping in the western region.
And that Northerners should not vote for him.
Exactly. He said the MPP overthrew Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, so Westerners should not vote for him. And yet he goes to northern region, and the only president we've had, apart from President Mahama being President Hilary Liman, was overthrown by President Mahama's own party. And yet he wants the people of northern region to vote for him. I mean, it gets that ridiculous. But you see, let's deal with the issues. First is that some of the things that the president has, some of the comments the president has made, some of the statements he has made, my real worry, my first worry, is the fact that, there are statements which are not presidential. There are statements which are unpresidential. Yeah. If you've been following the United States elections, one of the biggest charges that Mrs. Hillary Clinton is been waging or throwing at Donald Trump is the fact that he's not qualified to be president because he speaks unpresidentially. Yes, I mean, he speaks in a manner which is not presidential. With the greatest of respect to the president, almost all the things that he's been saying about Nana Akufo-Addo, to start with, they are very unpresidential. I mean, presidents don't speak like that. In fact, some of the things he said about Nana Akufo-Addo's person, even me, will not utter those kinds of words, let alone the president of the republic. Yeah. So they are very unpresidential. I mean, it's not presidential and proper for a president to say about his opponent that he was sleeping. I mean, even the language is not refined. Yeah. It's not proper for a president to say his opponent is a dictator. I mean, it's sad. And so that is a very low point. And even in our 4th Republican dispensation, even if you were to take into account all of the booms by President Rawlings, this is quite extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, if you take into account
Rawlings
all the booms, all the few excesses by President Rawlings, President Kufuor, President Mills, I mean, once in a while, when the crowd is charged and all of that, you can slip a bit. This one is totally unprecedented and totally extraordinary. I mean, this never been heard in Ghanaian political discussions where a president goes out and essentially attacks the person of his opponent and insults him if you want. So that's the first point. Now, the second point is that I think Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has shown a lot of maturity and leadership. You know, in the teeth of all of this. Take, for example, the aspersion and the attack President Mahama leveled or waged against him in the Western region when he said Akufo-Addo was sleeping. I mean, some persons may think that Nana Akufo-Addo will come back at him in equal measure. But what did he say? Nana Akufo-Addo simply said, Mr. President, he said I was sleeping in the Western region. Thank you very much. But whether I was sleeping or I wasn't sleeping, I believe on December 7th, the people of the Western region will live in those environs and know the state of the road network in their environs will make that determination. I mean, the day he said it, I had goosebumps. I think he showed class, he showed leadership. The president didn't end it there. He goes to the northern region, and there are germane critical issues that one would have expected the president to speak to, and I'll speak to some of them immediately. And yet the president goes ahead to call Nana Akufo-Addo names. He's divisive, he's a dictator, he's what? Until they...
I'm just struggling to understand how, under this current constitutional structure, we can have a dictator.
I mean, it's interesting. It's just interesting. And yet Akufo-Addo has not said a word about him, or he's not replied him. I think that shows a lot of leadership, it shows a lot of maturity, and thank God that in these elections, the Ghanaian people are going to be presented with a matured, decent, dignified, experienced man. I mean, who's built a large heart and a big stomach, so much so that he's accommodating no mean person but the president of Ghana. President of Ghana insulting his opponent, and his opponent will just not mind him, as we say in Ghanaian parlance. Now, the president should note that the matters that he spoke to, which is, MPP's internal matters and what have you, I hold in my hand a high court judgment titled, Mr. Afoko and MPP, it goes on and on, a high court judgment. And this judgment is actually an 88-page judgment, which judgment has validated, has confirmed, and has given a blessing to the processes, the procedures, and the conduct of the MPP when it comes to this matter. So contrary to what President Mahama wants the Ghanaian people to believe, Nana Akufo-Addo and the MPP actually, through the case that he cited, or through the matter that he cited, have demonstrated that we adhere to the rule of law, we adhere to due process, we adhere to all the principles that a party which can be proud of its democratic credentials ought to follow. We did so, and the court validated. Indeed, the judge in his judgment said the processes which led to the suspensions of these officers were lawful, were fair, and were just. These are the words of the court. A dictator does not preside over such a process which gets such an enormous validation by the High Court of Ghana. When the Supreme Court is taking this, the president is flouting those decisions. He's not a dictator. Nana Akufo-Addo and his party, which follows due process and follows the law and gets a validation from the High Court of Ghana, turns around to be a dictator.
Challenge him in his internal election.
They kicked him out.
Yeah, and they kicked him out.
And let me say, Akbar, the New Patriotic Party is a very united force. You can't help it, my brother. I was with Nana Akufo-Addo in Western Region. You can't help it to see Honorable Alan Chirmantin making a passionate, forceful, emotional, unrepentant case for the election of Nana Akufo-Addo. He speaks for almost 15 to 20 minutes on every platform, explaining Akufo-Addo's job creation formula, explaining Akufo-Addo's formula and plan to revamp this economy and create thousands of jobs. And I can't help it. My friend, you can't help it.
But in the northern region, the president's own party is sharply divided. Two ministers are at each other's throat,
and their supporters are fighting every day. But in any
event, the president has not been able to solve
the NDC and its history, Obeda Samoa formed the party. And so if you follow the president's own logic, that why? Francis Essien, wasn't she whipped in and many other examples. You should see Adenimo. You should see Asamoah Boateng, Preku, and the rest canvassing for Nana Akufo-Addo. I'm very proud to be a member of the greatest political party which was ever founded in Africa, the Great New Patriotic Party. We are united, we are formidable, we are poised for victory. Now you see, why did the president attack Akufo-Addo in the north? Because the president's legacy is weak. In the last election, the president's message to the people of Northern Region was that he was a Northerner, so we should vote for him. You and I, we are Northerners. We are all from. That's what he told us. Say we should vote for him because he's a Northerner. I said, I'm a Northerner. I'm a Gonja like the president. I actually hail from the same jurisdiction as he does. We are related in somehow by blood, extended family. But I'm also going to vote for him in 2022. I said so. And I said I won't vote for him because I know the man cannot do the job. I will not vote for him in this election. I will vote for Nana Akufo-Addo. And I'll vote for Nana Akufo-Addo because, as a Northerner, I know that President Mahama has had the opportunity as Vice President to have implemented SAGA. When Nana Akufo-Addo promised the Northern Development Authority at the campuses of UDS President Mahama, then vice presidential candidate, initially poo-pooed it and said if he has that money, he should go and pay VRA debt. Subsequent to that, when they realized that the policy proposal was resonating among the people of Northern Ghana, they brought in SADA. As vice president, President Mills gave him the singular responsibility to ensure that SADA becomes a success. And why is SADA important? Why is Northern Development Authority important? As you know, education got to Southern Ghana 100 clear years before it got to Northern Ghana. As you know, in fact, Northern Ghana was colonized way after Southern Ghana was colonized. And the climate and the temperature and everything. So for very germane and critical reasons, there is a developmental gap between the North and the South. And Nana Akufo-Addo said, it is in the interest of the people of Northern Ghana for Northern Ghana to be developed. Just the same way that it is the interest of Southern Ghana and all of Ghana for the developmental gap to be bridged, because otherwise we cannot safeguard our security. You have our brothers and sisters from the North trooping to the South every day for non-existing jobs. What does it bode for the security of our country? It has far-reaching implications. That is why Akufo-Addo genuinely was committed in the 2012 elections, just the same way he's still committed today, to bridge the developmental gap between the North and the South. President Mahama, the Northern president, was given the opportunity as vice president. SADA, the board of SADA, all of them without exception, not even one person, were NDC Nordness. And I qualify it with emphasis. I qualify it with NDC Nordness, all of them. The management of SADA, all of them were NDC Nordness. And yet, in the end, SADA became a vehicle for creating,
some of them are allies of the president,
for looting and sharing. It became a vehicle for looting, creating looting and sharing. SADA became a vehicle for corruption. And SADA has turned out to become a palpable, embarrassing failure. And it is not surprising that throughout the tour of President Mahama, he's not mentioned SADA even once.
Not even a Greek, not SADA, not
a Greek, not SADA. His
his audience largely has been peasant farmers.
Peasant farmers, and yet he doesn't talk about agriculture, and yet he doesn't talk about SADA, because SADA has been
We've got a minute to go. So
it's a spectacular failure. So the point is that the president can insult Akufo-Addo as he pleases, but I have a message for our party people. My message to our party people is that let's stay resolute. I feel extremely proud about the sacrifices of the rank and file of our party. All of you who are pasting posters, keep it up. All of you are dipping your hands into your pockets to remove 1 cedi, 2 cedis there to contribute to this, but keep it up. Those of you who are knocking on doors, please keep it up. And those who are pounding on pavements, keep it up. But the good work you are doing, keep it up. And let all of those who are praying for our struggle, keep it up. By the grace of Almighty God, there is a historic victory which is beckoning us, because the Ghanaian people cannot be disappointed on this occasion. And I believe we will get there.
I believe we will get there. Viewers, you've heard it all. The verdict is simple. The decision by President Mahama constitutes a major assault and a fundamental debasement of the rule of law.
Exactly.
It has brought down the aura of respectability associated to the office of the president. In order to restore that, we have to elect Akufo-Addo in December. See you next week for yet another interesting edition of Minority Caucus. Good night.